The email hit my inbox at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Training budget eliminated effective immediately. Find alternative solutions. Signed by my boss, Marcus Blackwell. 2 years of planning, gone. But what Marcus didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I stared at the screen in my cramped cubicle at Meridian Financial Services, reading the message 3 times before it sank in. The training program I'd been developing for our compliance department, 6 months of research, vendor negotiations, and strategic planning, was dead in the water. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 28, I was the senior compliance analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Chicago. I'd been with Meridian for 4 years, working my way up from an entry-level position, always believing that hard work and dedication would eventually pay off. The training program wasn't just a project for me. It was my ticket to the promotion I'd been chasing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had hired me specifically because of my background in regulatory compliance and my ideas for modernizing our outdated processes. During my interview, he'd praised my vision for comprehensive staff training that would keep us ahead of evolving financial regulations. "We need someone who thinks outside the box," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair with that practiced smile. "Someone who can bring fresh ideas to an old industry." For 2 years, I'd done exactly that. I'd identified gaps in our knowledge base, researched training solutions, and built relationships with industry experts. The program I'd designed would have saved the company hundreds of thousands in potential fines while positioning us as leaders in compliance excellence. The preliminary budget was $75,000, a fraction of what we'd pay if regulators found us lacking during their next audit. But Marcus had other plans. 3 weeks earlier, he'd announced his intention to purchase a luxury company retreat center in Colorado. The price tag? Exactly $75,000. Coincidence? I doubted it. I knocked on his office door that evening, my carefully prepared talking points ready. Marcus was packing up for the day, adjusting his gold cufflinks, the ones he claimed were a gift from a grateful client, but everyone knew he'd bought himself. "Sarah, what can I do for you?" His tone was casual, as if he hadn't just torpedoed months of my work. I wanted to discuss the training budget decision. "I think there might be some misunderstanding about the return on investment." "No misunderstanding." He didn't look up from his briefcase. "The board wants to see cost reductions, not new expenses. Training is a luxury we can't afford right now. But the regulatory changes coming in Q3 alone will require. Figure it out without the budget." He snapped his briefcase shut and looked at me directly for the first time. "That's what I pay you for, isn't it? Problem solving?" The dismissal stung, but what came next was worse. "Besides," he continued, "I'm not sure this training initiative aligns with our current strategic direction. Maybe it's time to focus on what you do best. Keeping your head down and making sure our paperwork stays clean." That night, I sat in my studio apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, feeling the weight of his words. Keep your head down. After 4 years of exceeding expectations, of staying late to master new regulations, of volunteering for every challenging assignment, that's how he saw me. Not as someone with vision or leadership potential, but as a paper pusher who should know her place. But something shifted in me that night. If Marcus wanted to eliminate my training budget, fine. If he thought I should keep my head down, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I opened my laptop and began making a list. The next morning, I started what I privately called Operation Self-Made. If the company wouldn't invest in training, I'd become my own training department. I mapped out every skill gap in our compliance framework and every area where Marcus consistently struggled or delegated to others. Then I got to work. First was regulatory analysis. Marcus regularly stumbled through client meetings when discussing new SEC requirements, often deferring to me for clarification. While he took credit for my briefings, I realized he didn't actually understand the underlying principles. I enrolled in advanced securities law courses through Georgetown University's online program, paying the $3,200 tuition myself. Next was leadership training. I'd noticed that Marcus's management style consisted mainly of delegation without follow-through and taking credit for subordinates' work. Real leadership, I was learning, required entirely different skills. I devoured books on organizational psychology, enrolled in a project management certification program, and joined the Chicago chapter of Women in Finance to network with actual leaders. The technology gap was glaring, our systems were antiquated, and Marcus openly admitted he, quote, wasn't a tech guy. While he saw this as charming honesty, I saw it as an opportunity. I spent weekends learning advanced Excel functions, database management, and financial modeling software. I taught myself Python programming specifically for financial analysis, skills that were becoming essential in our industry. But the most important thing I learned wasn't from any course or book. It was from watching Marcus operate day after day, seeing the patterns in his failures and understanding exactly why they happened. Take the Morrison account, for instance. David Morrison was one of our biggest clients, managing a $12 million portfolio. 3 months after my training budget was cut, Morrison called with concerns about new tax implications for his overseas investments. Marcus took the call, assured Morrison that everything was handled, then immediately walked to my desk. Sarah, I need you to research tax treaties for Morrison's Singapore holdings. He's worried about double taxation. I'd already researched this exact issue the week before, anticipating questions from several international clients. I'd prepared a comprehensive analysis of tax treaty benefits and strategies for optimization. But instead of simply handing over my work, I made a different choice. I'll get right on that, I told Marcus. Then I spent the next 3 days creating the most thorough, detailed report on international tax treaties our firm had ever produced. I didn't just answer Morrison's question. I anticipated every follow-up question he might have, and several he hadn't thought of yet. When I presented the report to Marcus, his eyes glazed over by page 2. This is very thorough, he said, clearly overwhelmed by the technical depth. Can you summarize the key points for my call with Morrison? Of course. I prepared a 1-page executive summary that made the complex issues digestible. Marcus read it twice, asked no questions, and scheduled his call. The Morrison call didn't go well. Despite my summary, Marcus couldn't field Morrison's specific questions about treaty provisions or optimization strategies. I listened from my desk as Marcus repeatedly said, "Let me get back to you on that," and "I'll need to verify those details." After the call, Morrison called back. "Is Sarah Chen available?" he asked our receptionist. "I'd like to discuss the technical aspects of my account directly with her." That conversation lasted an hour. Morrison was impressed not just with my knowledge, but with my ability to explain complex concepts in practical terms. By the end of the call, he'd asked me to handle all technical aspects of his account going forward. Marcus wasn't pleased when he heard about Morrison's request, but he couldn't argue with keeping a major client happy. What he didn't realize was that Morrison had already started recommending me to other high-net-worth individuals in his network. This pattern repeated itself across multiple accounts over the following months. While Marcus focused on the retreat center purchase and office politics, I was quietly becoming the go-to expert for our most sophisticated clients. Every challenge he delegated to me became an opportunity to demonstrate competence he lacked. The breakthrough came 6 months after the budget cut, during our quarterly compliance audit. The state regulatory team arrived for their annual review, and Marcus was scheduled to present our compliance overview. I'd prepared his presentation materials, as usual, but this time I'd included several technical sections that required a deep understanding of recent regulatory changes. 20 minutes into his presentation, Marcus was struggling. The lead auditor asked pointed questions about our risk assessment protocols for emerging market investments. Marcus fumbled through half answers before finally saying, "Sarah Chen, our senior compliance analyst, can provide more detailed information on those protocols." I stepped forward and delivered a flawless explanation of our enhanced risk assessment framework, a system I'd developed and implemented over the past 6 months without any budget support. The auditors were impressed. They asked follow-up questions about implementation timelines, staff training procedures, and quality control measures. I answered each question with confidence and specificity. Then, after the audit, the lead examiner approached me privately. "Ms. Chen, your compliance framework is exactly what we like to see. Have you considered consulting work?" Several firms in the region could benefit from your expertise. That conversation planted a seed. If I could impress state regulators and high net worth clients, maybe I was ready for bigger challenges. 2 weeks later, opportunity knocked in an unexpected way. Our parent company, Meridian Holdings, announced they were seeking a new director of compliance for their Chicago operations. The position would oversee not just our office, but 3 other regional branches. It was Marcus's dream job, the role he'd been positioning himself for since I'd known him. The job posting required extensive knowledge of multi-state regulatory frameworks, proven leadership experience, and demonstrated success in compliance program development. As I read through the requirements, I realized I'd systematically developed expertise in every single area over the past 8 months. Marcus, meanwhile, was already counting his chickens. He spent the next week networking with executives at the parent company, leveraging every contact he had. He even mentioned to several colleagues that he was practically guaranteed the position. But when I submitted my application, something interesting happened. The parent company's HR director called me directly for a preliminary conversation. "Ms. Chen, your application is fascinating. Several of our board members have heard about your work with the Morrison account and others. Could we schedule a time to discuss your experience?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What followed was the most thorough interview process of my career. Unlike my original interview with Marcus 4 years earlier, these conversations focused on specific achievements, technical knowledge, and strategic vision. I wasn't just answering questions. I was demonstrating expertise I'd earned through months of self-directed learning and real-world application. The final interview was with the regional vice president, Janet Rodriguez. She'd built her career in compliance and had a reputation for asking tough questions. We spent 2 hours discussing regulatory trends, risk management strategies, and leadership philosophy. Near the end of our conversation, she asked something that caught me off guard. "Sarah, I've reviewed your personnel file, and I'm curious about something. Your direct supervisor's performance reviews consistently rate you as, quote, meeting expectations, despite what appears to be exceptional work. How do you explain that discrepancy?" I chose my words carefully. I think different managers have different standards and different ways of recognizing contributions. My focus has always been on delivering results for clients and the company, regardless of how that work is categorized internally. Janet nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me about the compliance training program you developed. I understand it was ultimately not implemented due to budget constraints." "That's correct. When the budget was eliminated, I decided to pursue the training myself and share that knowledge informally with colleagues who were interested. I explained how I translated formal training concepts into practical, on-the-job learning opportunities." Interesting approach. And this self-directed training, it led to the enhanced risk assessment protocols you developed? Among other things, yes. I believe continuous learning is essential in our field, whether it's formally funded or not. After that interview, I knew something had shifted. Janet had asked questions that demonstrated she understood not just what I'd accomplished, but how I'd accomplished it under difficult circumstances. More importantly, she seemed to recognize qualities in me that Marcus had either missed or deliberately overlooked. The waiting period was agonizing. Marcus grew increasingly confident as days passed without word from the parent company. He'd already started making plans for his new role, even mentioning to me that he'd put in a good word for my advancement within the local office once he moved up. His confidence was misplaced. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Janet Rodriguez's voice was professional but warm when she asked if I could come in for a final meeting Monday morning. "We'd like to discuss next steps," she said. No hints, no promises, just a simple invitation that made my stomach flip. Ha! That weekend crawled by. I spent Saturday reviewing everything I'd learned over the past 8 months, not to prepare for more questions, but to remind myself how far I'd come. The woman who'd sat in that cubicle reading Marcus's dismissive email was gone. In her place was someone who'd proven that opportunity doesn't wait for permission. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical Chicago October weather. I arrived at the parent company's downtown offices 30 minutes early, using the time to center myself. The building was impressive. 42 floors of glass and steel that housed the regional headquarters for Meridian Holdings. This was where the real decisions were made. Janet's office was on the 38th floor, with windows overlooking the Chicago River. She was waiting with two other executives I recognized from company meetings: Thomas Webb, the Chief Operating Officer, and Lisa Martinez, the Regional Director of Human Resources. "Sarah, thank you for coming in," Janet said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I'll get straight to the point. We've completed our review process for the Director of Compliance position, and we'd like to offer you the role." The words hit me like a physical force. I'd hoped, of course, but hearing them spoken aloud was different. "I'm honored," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Thomas leaned forward. "Your application was exceptional, but what really impressed us was your initiative in developing compliance protocols without budget support. That's exactly the kind of resourcefulness we need in a leadership role." Lisa added, "We also spoke with several clients who specifically requested to share feedback about your work. David Morrison was particularly vocal about your expertise and professionalism." Janet pulled out a folder. "The position comes with a substantial increase in responsibility. You'll oversee compliance for 4 regional offices, manage a team of 12 analysts, and have a budget of $300,000 for training and development initiatives. The salary is $145,000, with performance bonuses and full executive benefits." I nearly laughed at the irony. Marcus had eliminated my $75,000 training budget, and now I was being offered a role with 4 times that amount to spend on exactly what I'd wanted to do in the first place. "There is one aspect we need to discuss," Thomas said, his expression becoming more serious. "This position would make you the direct supervisor of your current manager, Marcus Blackwell. We understand that this presents a unique situation." Janet nodded. "We want to be clear that this promotion is based entirely on your qualifications and performance. However, we also can't ignore the dynamics that might result from this change in reporting structure. I'd thought about this possibility, of course. Marcus wouldn't take kindly to being managed by someone he'd dismissed as a paper pusher. But I'd also learned something important over the past months. Leadership isn't about making everyone comfortable. It's about making the right decisions for the organization." "I appreciate you bringing this up," I said. "I believe professional relationships should be based on mutual respect and shared goals. If Mr. Blackwell is committed to those principles, I don't see why we can't work together effectively." Thomas smiled. "Diplomatically put. We'll handle the transition announcement carefully to minimize any disruption." The meeting concluded with logistics, start date, transition timeline, and initial priorities. I would begin in 2 weeks, giving me time to prepare for the new responsibilities, while allowing the company to announce the change appropriately. Walking back to my car, I felt surreal. The city looked different somehow, as if the promotion had shifted my perspective along with my circumstances. I'd spent 4 years in that cubicle, looking up at these downtown towers and wondering if I'd ever work in one of them. Now I would, and it was because I'd refused to accept limitations that others had tried to impose on me. The announcement came the following Tuesday. Janet had decided to handle it personally, calling an all-hands meeting for the local office. I arrived that morning to find Marcus already at his desk, looking pleased with himself. He still believed he was about to be promoted. "Big day today," he said as I passed his office. "I hope you're ready for some changes around here." I nodded politely and continued to my desk. In a few hours, he'd understand exactly what changes were coming. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room. As staff filed in, I noticed the mix of curiosity and routine boredom that typically accompanied company announcements. Most people expected the usual quarterly updates or policy changes. Janet stood at the front of the room, projecting confidence and authority. "Thank you all for gathering today. I'm here to announce an important leadership change that will strengthen our compliance operations across the region." Marcus straightened in his chair, preparing for his moment of recognition. Effective in 2 weeks, Sarah Chen will be promoted to Director of Compliance for the Meridian Holdings Chicago region. In this role, she'll oversee compliance operations for 4 offices and implement enhanced training programs across all locations. The silence was deafening. I could see colleagues processing the information, their glances shifting between Janet, Marcus, and me. The shock on Marcus's face was almost comical. His mouth literally hung open. Janet continued. Sarah's innovative approach to compliance management and her proven track record with high-value clients made her the clear choice for this position. She'll be working closely with all department heads to ensure smooth integration across our regional operations. After the formal announcement, Janet opened the floor for questions. Most were routine, timeline inquiries, procedural questions, general congratulations. But I could see Marcus struggling to process what had happened. His face had gone from shock to something approaching panic. When the meeting ended, people approached me with congratulations and handshakes. Several colleagues who'd witnessed my work over the past months seemed genuinely pleased, even if they were surprised by the magnitude of the promotion. Marcus lingered until the room emptied, then approached Janet. "I'd like to speak with you privately," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Of course. Sarah, could you join us? This transition affects both of you." We moved to a smaller conference room, where Marcus immediately launched into what I can only describe as a professional meltdown. "I don't understand this decision," he said, his usual smooth demeanor cracking. "I've been managing this department for 6 years. I have relationships with senior management. I have experience." "You do have experience," Janet interrupted calmly, "and that experience will be valuable as you support Sarah in her new role. She'll need managers who understand local operations and client relationships." The reality was sinking in. Marcus wasn't just being passed over for promotion. He was going to report to someone he'd spent 2 years dismissing and undermining. "This is highly irregular," he continued. "Promoting someone over their direct supervisor creates obvious complications. I'm not sure I can effectively." "Mr. Blackwell," Janet's voice carried a warning tone, "let me be clear about something. This decision was made based on performance metrics, client feedback, and demonstrated leadership capabilities. If you have concerns about working within our established reporting structure, we can certainly discuss alternative arrangements." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus could accept the new hierarchy or find himself looking for a new job entirely. After Janet left, Marcus and I sat alone in the conference room. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken tensions and reversed fortunes. "I suppose you think you've won something," he finally said. "I think I've earned an opportunity," I replied, "just like you earned yours 6 years ago." He laughed bitterly. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Managing people, dealing with corporate politics, handling pressure from above and below. It's not the same as being good at technical work." "You're right," I said. "It's not the same. But I've been watching and learning for 4 years. I've seen what works and what doesn't. I've seen how to earn respect and how to lose it." Marcus's expression darkened. "If you think you can just waltz in and change everything overnight, I think I can build on what's working and improve what isn't, starting with the training programs you eliminated." That hit home. Marcus had forgotten about his budget cut, but I hadn't. Every skill I'd developed, every relationship I'd built, every success I'd achieved over the past 8 months had been in spite of his decision to eliminate my resources. "Sarah," he said, his tone shifting to something approaching pleading, "we've worked together for years. We don't have to let this change affect our professional relationship. I'm willing to support your transition." "I appreciate that," I cut him off. "And I hope you mean it, because I'll need experienced managers who are committed to the success of this department. The question is whether you're willing to be one of them." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and transition meetings. I spent time with each department head, reviewing operations and identifying immediate priorities. The training budget I'd been promised was already generating ideas, not just for compliance education, but for leadership development and technical skills advancement. Marcus, to his credit, maintained professional behavior during the transition period. He answered questions, provided operational details, and avoided any obvious sabotage. Whether this cooperation would continue once I officially took over remained to be seen. My first day as Director of Compliance arrived with unexpected fanfare. The parent company had decided to make my promotion part of a broader communications strategy about investing in emerging talent. My story, the analyst who developed expertise without budget support and earned promotion through demonstrated excellence, fit perfectly with their corporate messaging about meritocracy and innovation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus's decision to cut my training budget had inadvertently created the exact narrative that senior management wanted to promote. By forcing me to become self-sufficient, he'd helped me develop the independence and resourcefulness that made me promotable. As I settled into my new office, the same one where Marcus had dismissed my training proposal 10 months earlier, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd read that budget elimination email was gone, replaced by someone who understood that opportunity doesn't wait for permission, and limitations are often just starting points in disguise. My first week as director brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. The transition from individual contributor to regional manager was like learning to speak a different language, one where every decision rippled through multiple offices and affected dozens of careers. The morning of my third day, I discovered my first major crisis. Jennifer Walsh from our Milwaukee office called at 7:30 a.m., her voice tight with panic. "Sarah, we have a problem. The Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions is here for an unscheduled audit, and they're asking about client trust account procedures that apparently haven't been updated since 2019. I pulled up Milwaukee's compliance records while Jennifer explained the situation. The audit team had identified discrepancies in how client funds were being segregated and documented. What should have been routine procedures were missing critical steps that newer regulations required. Who was responsible for keeping those procedures current? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Marcus told us everything was handled at the regional level. He said we didn't need to worry about individual office updates. There it was. Marcus had been managing compliance across 4 offices without actually managing it. He'd centralized authority but not responsibility, leaving local offices vulnerable to exactly this kind of situation. I drove to Milwaukee that afternoon, bringing updated procedure manuals and the documentation the auditors needed. The 3-hour drive gave me time to think about larger systemic issues that this crisis revealed. Marcus hadn't just cut training budgets. He'd created an organizational structure where critical information existed only in his head, making everyone else dependent on his availability and attention. The Milwaukee audit concluded successfully, but only after I spent 2 days working directly with the examination team to demonstrate our corrected procedures. The lead auditor, Patricia Moore, was impressed with the quick response but asked pointed questions about why these updates hadn't been implemented earlier. "Ms. Chen, your regional coordination is exactly what we like to see. But this situation suggests there may have been some communication gaps in your previous management structure." I chose my words carefully. We're implementing enhanced communication protocols to ensure all offices stay current with regulatory changes. This experience has highlighted areas where we can improve our systems. Patricia nodded. "Well, your response has been exemplary. We'll note that in our report." Driving back to Chicago, I realized this crisis was actually an opportunity. The Milwaukee situation had revealed weaknesses that existed across all 4 offices. If I could fix these systematically, I'd be preventing similar problems before they occurred. Back in Chicago, I called an emergency meeting with all department heads. Marcus attended, looking uncomfortable as I outlined the Milwaukee findings and their implications for other locations. The fundamental issue, I explained, is that we've been operating with centralized decision-making but decentralized execution. Regional offices were following outdated procedures because no one had clear responsibility for keeping them updated. Tom Bradley from our Detroit office raised his hand. "Sarah, to be honest, we've been having similar concerns but weren't sure who to contact about procedure updates." "That's exactly the problem," I said. "Moving forward, each office will have direct communication channels for regulatory questions, and we'll implement monthly compliance reviews to catch issues before they become audit findings." Marcus finally spoke up. "This seems like a significant change in operational structure. Are we sure we want to decentralize authority that much?" "We're not decentralizing authority," I replied. "We're distributing responsibility. Each office manager will be accountable for maintaining current procedures, but with clear escalation paths and regular regional oversight." After the meeting, Marcus lingered behind again. "Sarah, I think you're moving too fast. These kinds of structural changes need careful consideration." "Marcus, Milwaukee could have resulted in significant fines and regulatory action. We were lucky this time. I'm not willing to gamble with the other offices. He crossed his arms. I've been managing these relationships for 6 years without major incidents. Until this week, I interrupted. Look, I respect your experience, but the regulatory environment has changed. What worked in 2019 isn't sufficient in 2025. We need systems that can adapt quickly to new requirements. What I didn't say was that I'd already started investigating compliance records from all 4 offices. The Milwaukee problem wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern of reactive rather than proactive management that had been building for years. Over the next month, I implemented what I called the Regional Compliance Network. Each office received updated procedure manuals, dedicated communication channels, and quarterly training sessions via video conference. More importantly, I established monthly compliance check-ins, where local managers could raise concerns before they became crises. The changes weren't popular with everyone. Some managers resented the additional oversight, viewing it as micromanagement. Marcus was particularly vocal about the unnecessary bureaucracy I was creating, but the results spoke for themselves. Within 6 weeks, we'd identified and corrected compliance gaps in all 4 offices. Client satisfaction scores improved as procedures became more consistent and efficient. Most importantly, we passed unscheduled audits in both Detroit and Phoenix without any significant findings. The success brought unexpected attention from corporate headquarters. Regional Vice President Janet Rodriguez scheduled a quarterly review meeting that included executives I'd never met before. People who made decisions about budget allocations and strategic direction for the entire Midwest region. The meeting was held in the parent company's executive conference room, an intimidating space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a mahogany table that could seat 20 people. I arrived with detailed reports on our compliance improvements, client satisfaction metrics, and cost savings from our enhanced procedures. Sarah, Janet began, your first quarter results are impressive. The Milwaukee audit response particularly caught our attention. Can you walk us through your approach? I presented the compliance network system, explaining how distributed responsibility with centralized oversight had improved both efficiency and effectiveness. The executives asked detailed questions about implementation costs, training requirements, and scalability to other regions. Chief Operating Officer Thomas Webb leaned forward. What's particularly interesting is that you've improved compliance while actually reducing overall costs. How did you achieve that? The previous system required reactive problem solving, which is always more expensive than proactive prevention. By investing in training and communication up front, we're avoiding the costs of audit findings, regulatory fines, and emergency corrections. Lisa Martinez from HR added, we've also seen improvements in employee satisfaction scores from your region. People seem more confident in their roles. That makes sense, I replied. When people understand their responsibilities clearly and have the tools to meet them, they perform better and feel more secure in their positions. After the formal presentation, Janet asked me to stay behind for a private conversation. Sarah, I want to discuss something with you. We're considering expanding your compliance network model to other regions. Would you be interested in taking on additional responsibilities? The opportunity was tempting, but I'd learned to ask the right questions. What would that expansion look like in practical terms? We're thinking about a vice president of regional compliance position. You'd oversee compliance operations for the entire Midwest, working with directors in 5 major markets. It would mean significant travel but also significant impact. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 18 months ago, I'd been fighting for a $75,000 training budget. Now I was being offered oversight of millions in compliance operations across multiple states. I'm interested, I said, but I'd want to ensure that the current regional improvements are sustainable before taking on additional responsibilities. Janet smiled. That's exactly the kind of thinking we want to see. Take some time to consider it. We're not in a rush to make changes just for the sake of change. That evening, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on how dramatically my professional life had transformed. The promotion from analyst to director had been significant, but this potential advancement represented something different entirely, recognition as a strategic leader rather than just a technical expert. But first, I had unfinished business with my current role. The Milwaukee crisis had revealed systemic issues, but it had also shown me something important about Marcus's management style. His approach wasn't just outdated, It was fundamentally flawed in ways that went beyond compliance procedures. The next morning brought another crisis, this one closer to home. Our largest Chicago client, Harrison Industries, was threatening to terminate their contract due to what they called inconsistent service quality and poor communication. Marcus had been managing the Harrison relationship personally for 3 years. When I reviewed the account files, I found a familiar pattern: reactive responses to problems that should have been anticipated, promises made without clear delivery plans, and communication gaps that left the client feeling neglected. This time, I decided to handle the situation differently. Instead of fixing the immediate problem and moving on, I was going to address the root cause. And that meant having a very difficult conversation with Marcus about his future role in the organization. Mullen. The Harrison Industries meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. Robert Harrison, the company's CFO, had agreed to one final discussion before making his termination decision. I spent Tuesday evening reviewing 3 years of account history, and what I found was worse than I'd expected. Marcus had been charging Harrison premium rates for what he called executive-level compliance consulting, but the actual work was being performed by junior analysts, including me, during my early years with the company. The bills showed Marcus's time, but the files contained work products that clearly came from other people. More problematic were the compliance gaps. Harrison Industries operated in both traditional manufacturing and emerging renewable energy sectors, which meant navigating complex regulatory frameworks across multiple agencies. Marcus had been treating them like a standard manufacturing client, missing entirely the specialized requirements for their solar panel division. I called Robert Harrison directly on Wednesday morning. "Mr. Harrison, I wanted to personally prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Could you help me understand your specific concerns so I can address them appropriately?" His response was blunt. "Ms. Chen, frankly, we've lost confidence in your firm's ability to handle our compliance needs. We've had 3 regulatory issues this year that your team should have anticipated. Each time, we've had to scramble to avoid penalties. Can you give me specifics about those situations? The EPA reporting requirements for our Phoenix facility, the OSHA updates for our new equipment installations, and the renewable energy tax credit documentation that nearly cost us $2.3 million in credits. Every time we raise these issues, Mr. Blackwell assures us everything is handled, but then we discover gaps that could have been prevented." I knew about all 3 situations. Each time, Marcus had delegated the research to me or other analysts after the problems had already surfaced. We'd managed to resolve them, but always reactively, never proactively. "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate your candor. Would you be willing to give us an opportunity to present a different approach to managing your compliance needs?" Different how? Proactive rather than reactive. Specialized expertise for your renewable energy operations. Regular strategic reviews rather than crisis management. There was a pause. "Ms. Chen, you're the analyst who actually resolved those 3 issues, aren't you?" "I was part of the team that worked on them, yes." "You were the entire team. Mr. Blackwell presented the solutions, but the work was yours. We could tell by the quality and attention to detail." Thursday morning's meeting included Robert Harrison, his legal counsel Jennifer Price, and his operations director Mike Torres. I arrived with Marcus, but I'd also brought detailed presentations on specialized compliance strategies for hybrid manufacturing renewable energy companies. Marcus opened with his usual smooth delivery about client relationships and service excellence. Robert Harrison cut him off after 3 minutes. "Mr. Blackwell, with respect, we've heard these assurances before. We're here to see concrete solutions." I stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, I've prepared a comprehensive review of your compliance landscape, including specific recommendations for preventing the types of issues you've experienced." Over the next hour, I walked through a detailed analysis of Harrison Industries' regulatory exposure across all their business units. I'd identified 12 areas where their current practices could be improved and created implementation timelines for each recommendation. "For your renewable energy division," I explained, "the regulatory framework is evolving monthly. We propose quarterly strategic reviews to identify emerging requirements before they become mandatory, with specialized analysts dedicated to tracking developments in this sector." Jennifer Price leaned forward. "This is exactly what we've been looking for. The previous approach felt like we were paying for premium service but receiving generic solutions." Mike Torres added, "Ms. Chen, your understanding of our operations is impressive. How quickly could these improvements be implemented? The foundational changes could be in place within 30 days. The specialized monitoring systems would be fully operational within 60 days. Robert Harrison looked at Marcus, then back at me. Ms. Chen, would you be personally overseeing our account going forward? Before I could answer, Marcus interjected. Our regional structure ensures that all clients receive executive oversight while benefiting from specialized expertise at the analyst level. That's not what I asked, Robert Harrison said firmly. Ms. Chen, will you be our primary point of contact? Yes, I said. As regional director, I'll personally manage strategic relationships with our major clients, including Harrison Industries. The meeting concluded with Harrison Industries agreeing to continue their contract under the new service structure. After they left, Marcus was visibly agitated. Sarah, you just completely undermined the account management structure I've spent years developing. Clients expect consistency in their relationships. Marcus, they were about to fire us. The structure you developed wasn't working for their needs. You don't understand the complexities of senior client relationships. These decisions affect more than just compliance. There are business development implications, revenue considerations. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that Harrison Industries generates $340,000 in annual revenue for this office. I understand that losing them would affect everyone's bonuses and potentially lead to layoffs. And I understand that your approach to managing their account was about to cost us all of that. Marcus fell silent. The financial reality was unavoidable. We'd come within hours of losing our largest local client because of management failures that had been building for years. That afternoon, I made a decision that had been forming since the Milwaukee crisis. I scheduled a meeting with Janet Rodriguez for the following week. It was time to have a conversation about Marcus's future role in the organization. But first, I needed to document everything properly. Over the weekend, I compiled a comprehensive review of operational issues that had emerged during my first quarter as director. The pattern was clear and concerning. Marcus's management style had created vulnerabilities across multiple areas of operation. The Milwaukee audit crisis wasn't an isolated incident. Similar compliance gaps existed in Detroit and Phoenix, prevented from becoming public problems only by luck and last-minute interventions. The Harrison Industries situation wasn't unique either. 2 other major clients had raised similar concerns about service quality and responsiveness. Most troubling was what I discovered about staff development and retention. Marcus had blocked training opportunities for multiple employees over the past 2 years, not just me. 3 talented analysts had left the company in the past 18 months, citing lack of growth opportunities and poor management support. Monday morning brought another revelation. I received a call from Patricia Moore, the Wisconsin auditor who'd handled the Milwaukee examination. Ms. Chen, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We've been discussing your regional compliance network with other state agencies. Would you be interested in presenting your model at the Midwest Regulatory Conference next month? The invitation was significant. The conference brought together regulatory officials from 12 states to discuss best practices and emerging challenges. Being asked to present meant our compliance network was gaining recognition beyond our own company. I'd be honored to participate, I told Patricia. What specific aspects would you like me to focus on? The proactive identification and prevention of compliance gaps. Your Milwaukee response showed us how effective communication and preparation can prevent minor issues from becoming major problems. After the call, I realized something important had shifted. I was no longer just fixing problems within our organization. I was developing solutions that other companies could learn from. The skills I developed through self-directed learning were now being recognized as industry-leading practices. Tuesday brought my scheduled meeting with Janet Rodriguez. I arrived with detailed documentation of operational improvements, client satisfaction metrics, and the invitation to present at the regulatory conference. Sarah, Janet began, your quarterly results continue to exceed expectations. But I sense you have concerns about something. I do. I think we need to discuss Marcus Blackwell's role in the organization. Janet's expression became more serious. What specific concerns do you have? I outlined the pattern of reactive management, client dissatisfaction, and staff development issues that had emerged during my first quarter. I was careful to focus on operational impacts rather than personal conflicts. The fundamental issue, I explained, is that Marcus's management approach creates systemic vulnerabilities. The Milwaukee audit, the Harrison Industries situation, the compliance gaps in other offices, these aren't coincidences. They're symptoms of a management philosophy that prioritizes appearance over substance. Janet listened without interruption as I presented my documentation. When I finished, she was quiet for several moments. Sarah, these are serious concerns, but they also raise questions about why these issues weren't identified earlier in our oversight processes. That's a fair point. I think part of the problem is that Marcus is very skilled at managing upward, presenting positive reports to senior leadership, while problems develop at the operational level. It's only when you examine the underlying data that patterns become clear. Janet nodded slowly. What outcome are you recommending? I think Marcus needs intensive management training and close oversight, or he needs to transition to a role that better matches his strengths. His technical knowledge is solid, but his management capabilities need significant development. And if he's not willing to accept either option? I met her gaze directly. Then we need to consider whether his continued employment is in the best interests of the organization. The meeting ended with Janet promising to review my documentation and schedule follow-up discussions with relevant stakeholders. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on how much had changed since that day Marcus cut my training budget. 18 months ago, I'd been powerless to challenge his decisions. Now I was documenting his failures and recommending his future. The reversal was complete, but it had come at a cost. The stress of managing upward conflict while trying to lead a regional team was exhausting. But as I thought about the Milwaukee team's improved confidence, Harrison Industries' renewed contract, and the upcoming conference presentation, I knew the effort was worth it. Sometimes leadership means making difficult decisions about people who aren't willing or able to meet the standards that excellence requires. The call from Janet came 3 days later, on a Thursday morning that started like any other. Sarah, can you come in this afternoon? We need to discuss the Marcus situation, and I'd like Thomas Webb to be part of the conversation. Thomas Webb's involvement meant this had escalated beyond regional management. As Chief Operating Officer, he only got involved when decisions would affect multiple departments or require significant organizational changes. I arrived at the parent company offices to find Janet and Thomas waiting in the executive conference room, along with someone I hadn't expected. Elena Vasquez, the company's employment attorney. Her presence suggested they were taking my documentation very seriously. Sarah, Thomas began, we've reviewed your analysis of operational issues in the Chicago region. Before we proceed, we want to ensure we have a complete understanding of the situation. Elena leaned forward. We also want to make sure that any actions we take are based on documented performance issues, rather than personality conflicts or management style differences. Over the next 2 hours, we went through every incident I documented: the Milwaukee audit crisis, the Harrison Industries near termination, the compliance gaps in other offices, the staff retention problems. Elena asked detailed questions about timelines, documentation, and witness accounts. Ms. Chen, Elena said, you've presented a compelling case that Mr. Blackwell's management approach has created operational risks. But I need to ask directly, do you believe these issues can be resolved through additional training and oversight, or do you think they represent fundamental incompetence? The question was blunt, but it demanded an honest answer. I think Marcus has technical knowledge that could be valuable in the right role, but I don't believe he has the judgment, communication skills, or strategic thinking necessary for management responsibilities at this level. Thomas nodded. That's consistent with what we're seeing in the data. Client satisfaction scores for the Chicago region have been declining for 2 years, while your individual performance metrics have been consistently strong. Janet added, there's also the training budget issue. Elena reviewed the decision-making process around that elimination, and we have concerns about how it was handled. Elena pulled out another file. Mr. Blackwell eliminated your training budget without consulting regional management or documenting business justification. The same week, he submitted a request for company funding of a management retreat that cost exactly the same amount. That raises questions about his priorities and decision-making process. I felt a surge of vindication. The retreat center purchase had always seemed suspicious, but I'd never imagined they'd investigate the connection. Kiwizi Thomas looked at me directly. Sarah, we're prepared to make some changes, but we want your input on implementation. What do you think would be the best approach? I think Marcus should be given an opportunity to transition to a role that better matches his strengths, perhaps senior analyst or technical specialist. If he's willing to accept that change and commit to professional development, it could work for everyone. And if he's not willing? Janet asked. Then you'll need to make a decision about whether his continued employment serves the organization's interests. Elena made notes throughout our discussion. We'll need to handle this carefully from a legal perspective. Mr. Blackwell has been with the company for 6 years, and any termination would need to be clearly documented as performance-based rather than retaliatory. The meeting concluded with them promising a decision within the week. As I drove back to the office, I wondered how Marcus would react to whatever changes were coming. His pride had already taken a significant blow when I was promoted above him. A demotion might be more than his ego could handle. Hapil Sapitan. Friday afternoon brought the answer. Janet called Marcus and me into a conference call with Thomas Webb. The conversation was formal and carefully scripted. Marcus, Thomas began, we've completed a comprehensive review of regional operations and client satisfaction metrics. While we appreciate your years of service, we've identified areas where changes are necessary. Marcus's voice was tight when he responded. What kind of changes? We're restructuring your role to focus on technical compliance analysis rather than management responsibilities. This would involve a change in title, reporting structure, and compensation, but it would allow you to leverage your technical expertise without the administrative burdens of management. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely controlled. You're demoting me because she complained about my management style? Elena's voice joined the call. Mr. Blackwell, this decision is based on performance metrics, client feedback, and operational outcomes. We're offering you an opportunity to continue with the company in a role that better matches your demonstrated strengths. And if I refuse this generous offer? Thomas's response was measured but firm. Then we would need to discuss separation terms. But we hope you'll consider the restructured position. Your technical knowledge is valuable to the organization. Marcus asked for time to consider the options. The call ended with an agreement that he would provide his decision by Monday morning. Prisamthikikaim Buter. That weekend was surreal. I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. From the analyst who'd had her training budget eliminated to the director who was now restructuring her former boss's career. The reversal felt complete, but it also felt strange. Monday morning brought Marcus's answer, delivered in person to my office. He looked older somehow, as if the weekend had aged him beyond his 42 years. I've decided to accept the technical analyst position, he said without preamble. But I want you to know that I think this whole situation has been handled poorly. I understand you're disappointed, I replied. Change is never easy, especially when it affects your career trajectory. Disappointed? He laughed bitterly. Sarah, 18 months ago you were asking me for permission to spend money on training courses. Now you're restructuring my job. You'll forgive me if disappointed seems inadequate. Marcus, I never wanted this to become personal. But I couldn't ignore operational problems that were affecting our clients and our team. He sat down across from my desk, the same desk where I'd once sat as his subordinate. You know what the real irony is? If I hadn't cut your training budget, you might never have developed the skills that made you promotable. I created my own replacement. There was truth in that observation, though not in the way he meant it. His decision to eliminate my resources had forced me to become self-sufficient. But it had also revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what leadership requires. Maybe, I said. But I think the real issue was that you saw training as an expense rather than an investment. That's a fundamental difference in how we approach professional development. Marcus stood up to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Sarah, you'll probably be good at this job. You understand the technical side better than I did, and you seem to actually care about developing other people. Just remember that management isn't just about being right. Sometimes it's about being practical. After he left, I sat alone in my office thinking about his parting words. There was wisdom in them, even coming from someone whose own management had failed. Leadership did require balancing idealism with pragmatism, principle with politics. 2 weeks later, I presented our regional compliance network model at the Midwest Regulatory Conference. The presentation was well received, with several other companies requesting consultations about implementing similar systems. During the Q&A session, someone asked about the challenges of organizational change. The most important thing, I said, is to focus on outcomes rather than personalities. When you identify problems, document them objectively, and propose solutions that serve the organization's interests. Change is difficult for everyone, but it's necessary when existing approaches aren't working. After the conference, Janet offered me the vice president position we'd discussed earlier. The role would involve overseeing compliance operations across 5 major markets, with a team of 8 directors and a budget that dwarfed anything I'd previously managed. I accepted the position, but with one condition: that I could implement the professional development programs that had been eliminated under the previous structure. The training budget that had started this entire journey became the foundation for a company-wide initiative to develop emerging talent. 6 months later, I received an unexpected email from Marcus. He'd left Meridian to join a smaller firm as a senior technical specialist, a role that apparently suited him better than management ever had. "Sarah," he wrote, "I wanted to let you know that I'm doing well in my new position. You were right about me not being suited for management. I'm much happier focusing on technical work without administrative responsibilities. I also wanted to apologize for how I handled things during your time reporting to me. You deserved better support than I provided. I hope the VP role is going well." I replied, thanking him for the message and wishing him success in his new role. Professional relationships don't always end cleanly, but they can sometimes find resolution through honest reflection and mutual respect. Looking back now, I realize that Marcus's decision to cut my training budget was a pivotal moment, though not for the reasons he intended. It forced me to take ownership of my professional development in ways that formal training programs never could have. More importantly, it taught me that limitations imposed by others are often just starting points for discovering what you're truly capable of achieving. The woman who'd sat in that cubicle reading the budget elimination email had been waiting for permission to grow. The executive who now oversees regional operations across 5 states learned that the best opportunities often come disguised as obstacles, and that sometimes the most valuable training happens when you're forced to teach yourself. 3 years after that pivotal email about my eliminated training budget, I stood before the National Association of Financial Compliance Officers, delivering the keynote address at their annual convention in Las Vegas. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was speaking about innovative training methodologies to an audience of 1,200 compliance professionals from across the country. My journey from cubicle analyst to vice president had attracted attention beyond Meridian Holdings. Harvard Business Review had featured our regional compliance network as a case study in organizational transformation. The Wall Street Journal had profiled me as one of their rising stars in financial services. Most significantly, I'd been invited to testify before Congress about proposed changes to financial compliance regulations. But success brings unexpected challenges. As vice president overseeing 5 regional markets, I managed a team of 43 people across 8 states. The scope of responsibility was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. Every decision affected multiple offices, hundreds of clients, and millions in revenue. The morning after my Las Vegas keynote, I received a call that would test everything I'd learned about leadership and crisis management. Angela Rodriguez, our newest regional director in Denver, was calling with barely controlled panic in her voice. "Sarah, we have a massive problem. The Colorado Securities Commission just launched an investigation into one of our largest clients, Pinnacle Investment Group. They're alleging systematic violations of fiduciary duty regulations, and they want all our compliance documentation dating back 3 years. Pinnacle managed $2.8 billion in client assets and generated over $4 million annually in fees for Meridian. More critically, if the allegations were proven, our firm could face regulatory sanctions that would threaten our ability to operate in Colorado entirely. Angela, walk me through what you know so far." The commission received whistleblower complaints about Pinnacle recommending high-fee investment products, without proper disclosure of conflicts of interest. They're claiming we should have identified these violations during our compliance oversight. I felt a familiar chill. This was exactly the kind of systemic risk that proactive compliance programs were designed to prevent. Who was managing the Pinnacle relationship, and what oversight procedures were in place? There was a pause before Angela answered. The relationship was managed by Kevin Walsh. He left the company 6 months ago, and we're still trying to piece together his client management approach. Kevin Walsh. The name triggered an unpleasant memory. He'd been one of Marcus's protégés, someone who'd adopted the same reactive management style that had created problems throughout our organization. When I'd restructured operations 2 years earlier, Kevin had resisted the new oversight procedures, arguing they were bureaucratic obstacles to client service. Angela, I need you to assemble every document related to Pinnacle. Compliance reviews, communication records, fee disclosures, everything. I'm flying to Denver this afternoon. The flight to Colorado gave me time to review Kevin's personnel file and our compliance protocols for large institutional clients. What I discovered was troubling. Kevin had consistently submitted minimal compliance reports for Pinnacle, often just checking boxes without substantive analysis. More concerning, he'd bypassed several escalation procedures when questions arose about the client's practices. In Denver, Angela met me at the airport with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression. Sarah, it's worse than I initially thought. Kevin apparently told Pinnacle they didn't need to implement certain disclosure requirements because our oversight was, quote, flexible. Flexible how? He seems to have given them verbal assurances that written policies didn't apply to their situation. There's no documentation of these conversations, but Pinnacle's executives are claiming Kevin approved their current practices. This was a nightmare scenario. If Kevin had indeed provided inappropriate guidance, Meridian could be liable not just for oversight failures, but for actively enabling regulatory violations. We spent the next 18 hours in crisis mode. I worked with Angela and her team to reconstruct 3 years of Pinnacle interactions, while our legal department coordinated with the Securities Commission's investigation team. The picture that emerged was damaging but not catastrophic. Kevin had been negligent rather than malicious. He'd failed to properly understand evolving fiduciary duty requirements, and had given Pinnacle guidance based on outdated interpretations of regulations. When new rules took effect, he hadn't updated his advice or implemented required compliance reviews. The solution required delicate navigation between regulatory requirements, client relationships, and legal exposure. I spent 2 days in meetings with Commission investigators, demonstrating how our enhanced compliance procedures would have prevented these oversights and outlining corrective measures we were implementing. Ms. Chen, the lead investigator, said during our final meeting, "Your firm's response has been exemplary. The systemic improvements you've described address our primary concerns about oversight capabilities." The investigation concluded with Meridian receiving a formal warning but no fines or sanctions. Pinnacle faced significant penalties and agreed to implement comprehensive compliance overhauls under our supervision. Most importantly, we retained both the client relationship and our regulatory standing. Flying back to Chicago, I reflected on how different this crisis felt from the Milwaukee audit situation 3 years earlier. Then, I'd been scrambling to fix problems created by others. Now I was preventing systemic failures before they could damage the organization. But the Pinnacle crisis had revealed something important about the challenges of scaling effective management across large organizations. As we grew, maintaining consistent standards and cultural values became increasingly difficult. The training programs and oversight procedures that worked well in single offices required constant adaptation for regional implementation. That realization led to my next major initiative, the Meridian Leadership Development Institute. Rather than simply training people on procedures, we would develop leaders who understood the principles behind effective compliance management. The program would identify high-potential employees early and provide them with mentorship, rotation opportunities, and advanced education. The proposal required significant investment, $2.3 million annually for the first 3 years. But I'd learned how to present business cases in terms that executives understood. The program would prevent costly regulatory failures, improve client retention through better service quality, and develop internal talent to support company growth. The presentation to the board of directors was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in December. I arrived at corporate headquarters with detailed projections, implementation timelines, and success metrics from pilot programs we'd already launched in 2 markets. "Sarah," began Chairman Robert Mitchell, "your track record gives this proposal significant credibility. But we need to understand the long-term strategic value beyond immediate compliance benefits." Mr. Mitchell, this program addresses 3 critical business challenges. First, it prevents the kind of regulatory crises that can cost millions in fines and lost business. Second, it develops the leadership pipeline we'll need as the company continues expanding. Third, it creates competitive advantage by establishing us as the employer of choice for top talent in our industry. Board member Patricia Holbrook leaned forward. "What specific ROI can we expect from this investment?" Conservative projections show a 300% return within 5 years through prevented regulatory penalties alone. When you factor in improved client retention and reduced recruiting costs, the return approaches 500%. The questions continued for 90 minutes, covering everything from curriculum development to performance measurement. But I could sense the board's growing confidence in both the program and my ability to execute it. 2 weeks later, the approval came through. The Meridian Leadership Development Institute would launch the following quarter, with me as its founding director in addition to my vice president responsibilities. The program's first cohort included 24 emerging leaders from across all regional markets. Among them was Jennifer Walsh, the Milwaukee office manager who'd handled that first audit crisis with such professionalism. Watching her present her capstone project on regulatory trend analysis, I was reminded of my own journey from analyst to executive. "The most important thing I've learned," Jennifer told the group during her presentation, "is that effective compliance isn't about following rules. It's about understanding the principles behind the rules and applying them to new situations." Her insight perfectly captured what I'd been trying to instill throughout the organization. Compliance wasn't a constraint on business operations. It was a framework for sustainable growth and competitive advantage. As the Institute's first year concluded, I received an unexpected call from my old mentor, Professor David Kim from Northwestern, where I'd taken those first online courses 3 years earlier. "Sarah, I've been following your career progress with great interest. Would you consider joining our advisory board for the new Masters in Financial Compliance program we're launching?" The invitation was flattering, but more than that, it represented a full-circle moment. The self-directed learning that had begun out of necessity was now contributing to formal academic programs that would train the next generation of compliance professionals. "Professor Kim, I'd be honored to contribute to the program. I have some ideas about integrating practical experience with academic theory that might be valuable." 6 months later, I found myself back in a classroom for the first time in years, but this time as a guest lecturer rather than a student. Speaking to graduate students about real-world compliance challenges, I shared the story of how an eliminated training budget had ultimately led to revolutionary changes in how organizations approach professional development. "The most valuable learning often happens when you're forced to take responsibility for your own growth," I told the class. "Formal training programs are important, but they can't replace the initiative to identify what you need to know and figure out how to learn it." After the lecture, a student approached me with a question that brought everything into perspective. "Ms. Chen, do you think your career would have developed differently if your boss hadn't cut your training budget?" I considered the question carefully. "I think I would have become competent in the areas covered by formal training, but I might never have developed the broader strategic thinking and problem-solving abilities that came from having to teach myself." Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is being forced to exceed what others think you're capable of. Standing in that classroom, I realized that Marcus's decision to eliminate my training budget had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Not because it was a good decision, it was short-sighted and poorly motivated, but because it had forced me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed. The journey from that frustrated analyst reading a budget elimination email to the executive now helping shape industry standards had taught me that the most powerful training happens when you stop waiting for permission to grow and start taking responsibility for your own excellence. Today, whenever I meet with employees who feel limited by their circumstances or frustrated with their opportunities, I share a simple truth. The most successful people are those who've learned to turn obstacles into education and constraints into creativity. Sometimes the best thing your boss can do for your career is to tell you no, because that's when you discover what you're truly capable of achieving on your own. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.